don't know if you know this, but I'm back at uni and there's exams going on, so I can't fully fill my mind with super deep dives. So I figured out instead I would put out like a few slices of content that are just not that long, but which I feel like I want to say nonetheless. JK Rowling is not the owner of the Harry Potter universe. Now, I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. Just making sure. I am certain that according to the law that she holds the copyright to Harry Potter because the law isn't always good or fair. Harry Potter taught me about this, you know. And this really isn't about how I think JK Rowling doesn't deserve to own Harry Potter either. I don't think your creative thought can or should ever be taken away from you, though she is, of course, a horrible transphobe and just generally politically not great. She's the Queen of Turf Island and effectively a liberal Blairite, which, you know, the latter is, in my opinion, sort of excusable. Many people have been misled like this, and for the best of reasons. But her whole turf shtick and how she plays into it is very actively dehumanizing and dangerous for a whole lot of people. And it's fucked up because I remember a lot of folks in my age cohort, especially queer people of all types and stripes, they really found an escape and a whole lot of self-acceptance in their readings of these books that she wrote back then. Plenty of very depressed teenagers would tell you that this series basically saved their life. It gave them something to look forward to, and that's why they're still here. This may seem super cringe to some people today because they haven't understood yet that in 10 years, all the things they grew up with will be quaint and dated, and the skibbity toilet generation will just not understand how anyone could ever relate to them in a non-cringe way. Not yet realizing themselves, of course, that they too are just the next step in this endless cycle. You just can't let other people define what you're supposed to like. You need to learn to enjoy the things that speak to you. They'll find their own way. This is for you, and they don't need to understand because they just weren't there. And there's nothing wrong with that. Though she clearly hated them all along, JK Rowling really helped a lot of transgender people crack their egg, especially with the second novel, because back when, like, Harry Potter was new, nobody knew she harbored these sorts of views. I mean, I'm sure some people knew, but like the overwhelming majority of people didn't. I actually, like some of you Germans might be able to relate to this. When I first that like JK Rowling was a raging, foaming at the mouth transphobe, I was like, you know, I was confused. I was like, what the fuck? Didn't the second Harry Potter book have like a whole major plot line about how Harry and Ron were trying to brew this magic potion to become women? Yeah, that wasn't actually in the Chamber of Secrets. That was the plot of Harry Potter und der geheime Pornokeller. An incredibly dumb, very raunchy, edgy, hilarious, frankly, redub parody of like early Harry Potter. This is like early YouTube days. Like the first couple of films were redubbed. I think pretty much everyone under the age of 40 in Germany has seen them. It just overwrote my memory of what the actual Chamber of Secrets plot was. And nonetheless, like Polyjuice Potion was to many an egg-cracking moment, right? Regardless of the fact that Harry and Ron used it to turn into like different guys, there's a whole conversation to be had here, of course, about how it is inherently queer to choose your own gender identity, even if it belongs to the gender your parents picked for you. You may have been raised to be one kind of man, but consciously analyzed this and then like chose decisively to become another type of man because you felt like that fit you more, that is more who you are, it represents your identity. But let's instead keep to the possibilities of the magic involved here were like instantly grasped by trans people, or rather not trans people yet, by eggs, often with great enthusiasm. That's not what this argument hinges on. It's neither a legal nor moral argument. It is based entirely on how I think stories and fictional works function and propagate throughout the collective consciousness of human society, especially like the really fucking big ones. And you can't deny that Harry Potter is a really fucking big one. 99.9% of Harry Potter fiction ever written was not written by JK Rowling, or even beheld by her at any point. Most of the time, a lot of like really hardcore Potterheads have spent enjoying Harry Potter for themselves has been with the various fanfiction sites out there, like reading, writing, discussing the things others had written, just sending horrible screeds and death threats to strangers on the internet because they preferred a different romantic pairing to them, making a literal, actual, real religion out of Severus Snape. This is a real unironic thing, which they did, that you can look this up. I learned about this very recently. Look up the Snape wives. This is not a joke. This is also why I couldn't make qualitative arguments as to why JK Rowling shouldn't own Harry Potter even if I wanted to, which I don't. People love to lambast her as though she were like the worst writer to ever live in the history of humanity, which is honestly just stupid virtue signaling. I mean, she's certainly not one of the greats, even though her financial success might indicate so, but she wrote a decent few very creative mystery stories, which is what the Harry Potter books are. They're mysteries, they're whodunits essentially. And she utilizes a lot of tricks of the trade very effectively. She is absolutely terrible at world building, which is one of the major things people started to explore, of course, as they wrote their own fan fictions, because, you know, when you expand on a work, you want to see where you can expand to. And if all you do see on the horizon is just unbelievably bullshit, you know, that's gonna leave an impression on you. I have a whole video where I go, like, ballistic about JK Rowling's world building, because I really feel there's a lot to be angry about. Fair warning though, I don't have a beard in it, so a lot of people might find that disturbing. But this whole, like, Manchurian Candidate nonsense people fall into when they hear the name JK Rowling, making them rant and rave about how she basically is a monkey with a typewriter putting together random letters. I really feel like that says a lot more about the people screaming about it at the top of their lungs rather than the actual novels. It's kind of like, you know how everyone becomes an art critic when it comes to hitless paintings? Like, they have to be the worst thing ever put to canvas, when really what they were was just not particularly impressive in a visual or technical sense. They were, I guess, kind of paintings. If you didn't know they were hitless paintings, you wouldn't give them a second look as you spied them, like, printed onto an overpriced postcard at a newspaper stand in Vienna. Or, like, you know, this soul-deadened, vaguely pleasant hotel room art that you never really look at straight on. Let's just say that most of the Harry Potter fanfiction out there isn't exactly Hemingway either. A lot of it doesn't even come close to, like, L. Ron Hubbard in terms of quality, though certainly in quantity. I don't think that matters too much. I think it's normal and good for people to fuck around with fiction no matter what anyone thinks of the results, even if what they write is terrible. And also, you know, if it's great, it doesn't matter either. What matters is that it speaks to them. The point is that we have a fictional universe that people are engaging with and finding meaning in, which I struggle to think ought to be owned by any one person or group of persons. And historically, that's actually a very new thing. For the longest time, throughout what you might call human history, the world of fiction, whether implicit fiction like religious tales or folkloric icons, or explicit fiction like stories Simbad or Scald or Griot made up as an allegory or to entertain, and mind you, like, the line is super fucking vague here to the point of non-existence. It was essentially something that people did together, is my point. Grimm's fairy tales were not stories the Grimm brothers made up, right? They were stories that they recorded from the people of the German-speaking world. There's fairy tales that are mutated stories passed along people and families and cultures, and just ones that were made up to entertain by the people whose job it was to do this. There really were people back then, as there are today, whose job it was to just go from place to place and tell people bullshit stories to entertain them, because we've always loved the fantasy of seeing images projected into our mind. It's one of those oldest professions in the world, candidates, I think, personally. And they didn't usually append, "This story was written by Johnny Jimbo Scaldface and none may retell it or produce derivative works of it." The ancient Greek playwrights all utilized, like, the same cast of characters. Very big cast, but it was usually the same ones, and not all of them were gods. A lot of them pretty explicitly were essentially OCs that some writer made up, and they, like, became part of the canon that later writers utilized. Dante's Inferno is essentially Bible fanfiction, and it now defines how most people around the world conceptualize of the Christian hell. If you want an explicitly fictitious example not tied up with religion, which is just the sort of fiction that used to be very popular because it related to a cast of characters most people knew and understood the motivations of, H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos was not something he claimed to own, like in the same way copyright lawyers have gaslit us into thinking of ownership. And many of its most defining and iconic contributions didn't come from H.P. Lovecraft, but from his friend August Derleth, as well as some others. And this is just in Western culture. Fiction and its fruits have been collectively owned pretty much everywhere throughout most of history. The idea that any one author could own a fictional universe is recent and based primarily in profit-seeking. But okay, wait a minute, I think there's reason here to be a little more nuanced than that. I'm an author, I'm trying to sell books, I am in fact in the finishing stages of publishing a novel right now. You can buy this book right here, 34 Worlds, and while yes, most of the stories in it are available for free, like as audiobooks narrated by me on my second channel, Who is Betty, plug, I'm trying to make money off this. I think that is a legitimate thing to do, given the labor it takes to write stories and books, and do all the things associated with that. People should be compensated for their labor. The concept of intellectual property is important to protect artists, because I wouldn't want some super famous person to like pick one of the stories from that book, or one of the ones that are not in that book that I've published, and like publish it as a movie without any sort of attribution to me, even though I am the one who created it, or to just republish the story, especially if I'm not going to be compensated for it in any way. Plenty of people have approached me to ask, hey, can I do like a short film or a comic adaptation of this and that story? And though I have yet to see any of that realized, my answer has thus far always been yes. Thanks for asking. If you want to do it non-commercially, feel free, and this includes like having like a Patreon link or something in the bio of whatever it is you do. If you want to make money off it, I'd like to see a reasonable cut, of course. But if somebody was to write their own story based off one of my stories, like they took a setting or a character or whatever and made money that way, sure, I'd like the world building and background attributed to me. I'd like to be mentioned as, hey, this is inspired by this and that story, but I don't expect to see any money from it, because those ideas are just ideas, and ideas are free. If anything, I'd be excited, because if that does well, people are gonna come and look at my work, as well as potentially buy it. I think limiting that exchange of ideas is actually very bad for the craft and the people who engage in it. Some writers are really protective of their worlds to the extent that they don't want anyone even writing fanfiction in them, and that really kind of feels a little rent-seeky to me. I really think the real value that is produced, the labor a writer ought to be compensated for, is the stories that they write. And if someone comes along and writes a story in the universe you created and established, and they're just better than you in a way that makes them overshadow your success, and speaks to the audience of the books you originally wrote more than those books, first of all, that's like very rare. You have such a huge home field advantage in this. But also, if it does happen, isn't that kind of the free market? Like, I know I'm like rent-seeky shit and all that. Like, not that I'm a big advocate for the free market, but the principle of the ideas being free and the craft of writing being the crucial bit here, I think is very relevant to people who have that sort of ideology. And aren't more people still gonna buy your book because of it, just out of interest? Cory Doctorow actually writes and talks extensively about copyright law in a digital age. You should look him up. He is absolutely fantastic. The fact of the matter is that the way copyright is written, especially in terms of creative works, is not to protect artists, but to protect massive corporations working to squeeze the soul out of those artists so they can maximize every single avenue of profit. Often in this process, actually taking away the artist's creative liberties, and most insidiously, even like owning IPs that very much are shared universes that many creatives contributed to, but the people controlling them and, the ones who have the final say about everything are ultimately investors and moguls with the creative capacity of a roasted walnut. The lion's share of the money doesn't go to the artists, it goes to the owners. That's most of the big universes, by the way. Star Wars, Marvel, DC, everything that has ever come out of AAA gaming, it's certainly examples far more egregious and restrictive than others. Think about this, right? Disney bought Star Wars. You may have heard of this. And then was like, look, most of the Star Wars universe is no longer the official Star Wars universe. And they did this because, you know, they could raise everything and make money off it all over again while not having to actually produce media that does the work of fitting into the established facts of the universe, because that's expensive and requires actual skill and, most crucially, time investment on the part of the writers. And then they'd have to pay the writers and producers for that, and they don't really want to, they're not in that kind of business. Think about how insane it is that they just get to do that. Like, some powerful entity just gets to own Greek mythology. I mean, fucking, like, Marvel tried to do this with Norse mythology, right? They just go, oh, Zeus is problematic and no longer canon. Hercules is being rebooted and all the old stories are no longer real. And then the reboot is just the exact same tropes as the original, but marginally different, so they can sell it as new. And now consider, and really sit down for this, that you do not have to give a fuck. I mean, shit, the main thing I talk about on this channel, World of Darkness, has a number of lore changes and even outright reboots. Do you think anyone cares when they implement the lore that they like at the game table? It's always been contradictory and like a huge mess. The old Star Wars lore, all of those novels, the books, and the artwork, it still exists. I'm sure they'd love to unexist it and delete it from your head, but it is still out there, like all of it. They cannot uncreate it to generate a situation of artificial scarcity. And believe me, especially Disney loves that. They're trying hard to limit the accessibility of their media to create artificial scarcity with the whole Disney Vault bollocks. You can still write privately stories based on it. You can think about them in your head, all of them, including or excluding any element of that lore, because ultimately, the totality of any set of lore is not and never has been absolute. Every manifestation of a work springing from a particular individual lore is a particular individual interpretation of it. A structure of crystallized ether formed from certain parts of a cloud of ether. The work may add to the ether with the debris it has accumulated, and other people scooping up from the cloud later may utilize it, or they may not. Every sort of IP has had fan theories that were so ubiquitously accepted, they're basically canon. And every lore that is an IP has tons of internal inconsistencies once it becomes large enough. The original work, the seed crystal, if you will, of that cloud, will always have a special place of particular purity. But everything derived of it has the potential to be captivating and interesting in its own right. JK Rowling will always have written those books. Nothing can undo this. And I do think that to republish them while pretending they were created by someone else would be highly unethical and absolutely should be illegal. We don't even do that with works of artists that have been dead for 2,000 years. But she also wrote that play. You know the one. And most Harry Potter fans don't care for it. They don't like it very much. So they just sort of ignore it. They don't think of it as part of the canon because it doesn't suit their personal engagement with the media. And that's not a problem because it is in fact fiction. You see probably how you edit that out of your personal canon. You edited it away. You may have forgotten about it entirely until I brought it up. Why is JK Rowling's canon more valid than yours to you? I don't think it should be. Maybe overall her interpretation of the canon should be more important, sure, but for any individual person, absolutely not. This isn't even a works you hate or have become to hate type situation. Like, I love the Elder Scrolls and its lore, but to me, personally, all the quests and quest lines of each game were not done by the same person, even though that is canonically the case. No one person is the hero of Kvatch, the Grand Champion of the Arena, the Archmage of the Imperial University, the Grand Master of the Fighters Guild, the Grey Fox of the Thieves Guild, the Listener of the Black Hand, and the Heir of Sheogorath. In my mind, these are all separate people, even though canonically, in the lore, it's all the same person. It just personally feels, I don't know, more believable, more plausible, more right to me. The time-traveling gay cyborg Templar who did so much elf genocide that entire swaths of reality were destroyed in the process is entirely plausible to me, though. That's fine. After the Mass Effect game series ended, I came up with a whole set of lore of what happened after the third game. And now they're doing a fourth one, apparently, and I reckon, probably, I'm just throwing the dice on this one, they're not gonna independently come up with the exact same lore I did. In my head, it'll be an alternate universe, which established IPs do all the time within their legally sanctioned properties. Like, Star Trek has entire crossovers of their alternate universes, and crossovers of the crossovers. And if you do count the weird-ass Harry Potter play, so does Harry Potter! So what is to stop Harry Potter fans from deciding that the Harry Potter books are just some sort of in-universe piece of political propaganda? Accurate enough to be, believable, especially when it comes to the day-to-day stuff that most people would see, but ultimately reductive and pushing a particular narrative, especially when it comes to the rest of the wizarding world. Maybe the British Isles are controlled by a sort of potentate called, get this, Harry Potter, who's selling a fictionalized account of his life and youth to build on a reputation of legitimately maybe having defeated one of the genuinely worst magical terrorists of all time. And also, look, he's such a strong ally to the Muggle-born wizards, and he shored up the rights of house elves and goblins and the like. Of course, ultimately, the system that is in place didn't really change in a fundamental way. It's all just cosmetics in order to justify keeping the same oppressive structures in place. Or all the bits where he violently annexed Ireland and deprived Scotland, Wales, and Cornwall of their independent wizarding identities, closed all the magic schools aside from the one he has absolute control over, and is now pretending that this is the only one that has ever existed because, look, this one Irish kid was there, and he was essentially a natural-born car bomber, so can we really trust the Irish to govern themselves? None of that is in the books. By framing himself as the boy who lived, all the other contributions, all the other heroes who are celebrated have become rolled up into his own story, his own narrative. So whenever we pay homage to Sirius Black, Nymphadora Tonks, Albus Dumbledore, whatever character you like, we are also at the same time always praying at the altar of Harry Potter because it was all about him in the first place. Maybe Harry Potter is just the ruler of his own little North Korean backwater, where a great veil of magic and propaganda ensure all the news that arrives from the outside world is simplified and controlled, handed out piecemeal to serve the interests of the Potterian state apparatus. Or maybe it did all happen the way it did in the books, and they're just particularly spotty on world building because, the rest of the world isn't that important to it. It's for kids. It's not that relevant to the plot. We don't want to confuse them. After all, everyone knows that, the only other two wizarding schools in Europe are not, in fact, Durmstrang and Beauxbatons. Though they are very prestigious schools attended by the wizarding elite, aka the kids born into privilege, as well as some who are Muggle-born in order to obfuscate how much of an incestuous system of power it is. Good Will Hunting, I don't think, talked much about the community colleges in Boston. Maybe those books are just a sort of advertising brochure created by Hogwarts to be, sold to kids. And none of it actually happened. It's in-universe fiction. There's really any number of options, and given how many Harry Potter fans there still are, they can all coexist. The point is, there's nothing stopping people from just thinking about the lore in this manner. Literally absolutely nothing. It's not even illegal or anything. And in the case of JK Rowling and the rather poor job she did in many places, it may even be for the best. Sure, it's not gonna fix everything that's wrong with the original work, and more works and lore released are not going to respect it or include it, and that matters to a lot of people, I think. But let's be serious, the official Harry Potter stuff, still coming out these days, is hardly motivated by a desire to fulfill some great artistic vision, so who cares? It really is mercenary work done by creatives forced to color within the lines so massive corporate players can extract every last milligram of money from people who were majorly impacted by Harry Potter in their youth and who have yet to lose all hope that maybe something good will happen. Hold on to that. So I say, make something good happen. Ignore Harry Potter canon. Do what you want with it. IP law exists, of course, but no one can tell you what to think and how to think or relate to this work. That is all up to you. Until they invent that AI that Tom Scott came up with as a hypothetical, which enforces copyright in a way that counts memories of a given work as having a copy of it, and will inject your brain with nanobots, and then it will delete those memories. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities. Consider buying some of my new merchant, not the fish, that's not the new merchandise, but these cups are among the new merchandise, you know. And if you are one of those people who's traveling backwards in time, and in that spirit, I promise I'm still doing stuff. It's just exam season in winter right now. So in that spirit, see you around, cunts.